Hey, what's up, everyone? This is another episode of Low Mileage Running Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Olson, and I am joined tonight by Andy Magness. He is the author of Ultramental, an unconventional approach to training for endurance events on a few hours a week or less. Andy, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron.
Hey, Andy, yeah, it's great to talk to you. Andy is in New Zealand, and we connected. I got an email from Andy a few weeks ago, and he has a similar approach to what I write about in my book, Low Mileage Running. And we thought it'd be a great idea to connect on Skype and get this out there as a podcast. So, Andy, tell me a little bit about your book, Ultramental, and how did you get started with even writing this book, and what made you want to write it in the first place?
So the writing of the book kind of came after about 5 years of experimenting on my own with low volume training for endurance. I had been struggling similarly to how what you talk about in your book, with not only injuries from training using high volume for endurance stuff, but also just in terms of finding the balance between work and life, and having real challenges with having a full-time job, and paying enough attention. I had a young family at the time, a young son, had was living over here in New Zealand at the time, and trying to train for a big 10-day adventure race. And it was just really starting to damage relationships and things like that. And I found that I couldn't really let go of my ambitions. I still had these ambitions to do these massive races. And conventional wisdom was telling me I had to be willing to devote 10, 20 hours a week to training. And I thought, man, maybe there's going to be another way. And so I just started training harder. And I found you're probably familiar with First Running. Have you heard of First Running, the
Yeah,
Furman Institute
yes.
of, yeah.
Yep.
And so in my initial exploration, I found something by these guys. And so I kind of took a program that they had and modified it for multi-sport stuff. And man, I got faster. I got fitter than I ever had been training, many more hours. And so I was hooked. And so as I continued to explore this, I continued to work more and more with high intensity. And I just found that I was able. I have a twin brother, which is a great thing for a n equals one kind of experiment, because he was on this professional adventure racing team, and he was training 10, 20 hours a week, and I was training 3 or less hours a week, and we'd get together and we'd race these big races, and I was able to keep up or match or exceed his performance. So I thought, man, this is really incredible. And so I did a bunch of research, and as I continued to race and do well, in my age group, I could certainly be fitter if I trained like a professional athlete, but I was really impressed with how I was able to meet my goals and be happy with how I was performing in races, training this tiny fraction of the time that other people were. And I met a guy in Canada who said, man, you got to write a book about this. And so he's the guy that writes the forward, Eric Collins. And so he convinced me to do that. And so the rest is history. Last year, I woke up every morning at 6 a.m. and wrote for an hour and got it done.
That's awesome. And I read your book last week, and I really like the approach. You talk a lot about using really high intensity, and you do even quite a bit of your training on a treadmill. Tell me a little bit about why you like to use the treadmill, or indoor workouts.
Well, and this is I get a lot of comments on this, and it's tough because I certainly like training outside more than I like training inside. But what I have found is that as I've been synthesizing down the intensity and trying to maximize intensity, I find two things good about the treadmill. One is that there are no distractions when you get in the gym, and you're on the treadmill. There are no excuses, and as you know, and you talk about in your book, the central governor, when you're working hard, your mind comes up with an infinite number of excuses as to why you should back off a little bit, and all of those things. So by working inside in a climate controlled environment, without wind, without rain, without cold and temperature variation, you really take away a lot of those distractions. And I found, at least personally, that I can consistently work closer to maximum intensity, or approach that, inside as opposed to outside. The other thing that I find is that um, you know inside, when you have an absolute metric of of assessing your performance, it benefits. You talk about tracking your workouts and how important it is to be able to track your workouts. And I think I call it a baseline workout in mine, but you call it a benchmark.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable if you're trying to use high intensity. And for me, when I go into the gym and I know last time I did this run, I did it at this pace and at this incline and managed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I get into the gym again, I know that I can manage this performance, and so it doesn't give me any excuses. And so I'm able to mentally kind of overcome that self-doubt talk and say, look, you just you hurt last time, it's going to hurt this time. Let's get on with it. And using those benchmarks or those baseline workouts, I'm also able to see that increased performance. If last time I did it at, a 5.5 minute mile, this time I'm going to try, 5:25 or something like that. And you can see that progress over time. So those are the reasons I like working inside, and specifically if I'm working at a minimum level of time. If I'm like right now, I'm doing 5-minute workouts, and I could not go outside and run for 5 minutes consistently and have the type of workouts I'm able to inside, just because of those control aspects. And if it's cold, you get the burning in your lungs, you can't push quite as hard, and there's some physiological factors as well. But the application to all this is outside. Like I go outside for my ventures, my big efforts, of course. I'm not interested in just going and seeing how can I run 50 miles in 10 hours on a treadmill. That has no interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I always go outside. I always take this stuff outside.
Yeah.
But when time's a factor, yeah. So.
Well, I like how you mentioned that on the treadmill, running and ultra events, I think are really a mind game. A big part of it, I mean, there is a lot of physiology, but there's also a huge component of, training that central governor, that subconscious part of your mind, giving yourself confidence that, yes, you can do this. And I think sometimes for me too, the treadmill helps me do that, because I'll set it at a certain pace and then I won't want to back off from that. And I'll just keep thinking I can hold on for a couple more minutes at this pace and something like that. So I think that you've got something there with using the treadmill to try to train your subconscious to go a little bit harder or a little bit faster.
Well, and one of my favorite, I was just going to mention one of the favorite workouts I have that I talk about in the book is what I call the no slow random program. And it's a half an hour treadmill run where I put it on a random incline interval. And then I start out at a pace that I feel pretty good about. And then when I start to get into the run and warmed up and feel kind of cocky, this is going great, I never let myself slow down. So usually 5 minutes into the run, I'll say, I can go faster. So I'll key it up to, 9 miles an hour or something like that. And then as I hit hills, some big hills later on in the program, I don't let myself slow down. So then you're just pushing and you get that in your head. I got to do it. I'm not going to slow down. So that really motivates me to have a good workout. So you can use it. People hate the treadmill, but it's a tool, right? So.
Yeah. So, that you said something interesting earlier, that right now you're only doing 5-minute workouts. Give our listeners an idea of what goes on during that 5 minutes and what kind of goals can you hope to achieve with just doing 5 minutes at a time?
Okay. So the 5-minute workout, like the running workout I'm doing now, is what I call a 30-30. So it's a 30-second sprint and then a 30-second rest. And it's basically on the treadmill. It's a little different than some of the other equipment I use, but on a treadmill, it's done similar to a Tabata on a treadmill, where the 30 seconds rest, I'm on the rails of the machine. And then the 30 seconds interval, I match my speed really quick. So for me in a workout like that, the speed is limited to about 10 miles an hour only, because I can't get my legs moving fast enough in the second that I have to match the speed. I've tried doing it at faster speeds, but I find it's really hard to go from 0 to much faster than about 10 miles an hour. But then I will use an incline and do 5 of those intervals. And so in 5 of those intervals, first couple usually feel all right. And then by the last one, I'm just hanging on for dear life. And I feel like, I feel like my body's jelly. I feel like just it's hard to describe. The blood is pounding in all of my body, because, running is such a whole body activity. When you get to that, that when you reach that maximal intensity, it's like you'd imagine, sprinting the last 100 meters in a race, right? Where you just giving it everything, and you feel the blood pounding through your body. You feel heavy everywhere, and you're just pushing. And so I found that I can get to that point pretty easily in 5 minutes. The challenge for me is that repeating workouts like that, like I usually only do 2 quality workouts a week, similar to what you're talking about. Repeating that same running quality workout, if I was going to try to do 2 of those 5-minute workouts, man, it would be very difficult because mentally it's so taxing. Like you're saying, you've got to be motivated. And what I found, like the schedule I'm doing right now is I'm alternating between running and biking, say, or running and rowing with a similar style workout. Now, a big part of what I do, and this is why I loved your book, by the way. I'm just giving you a little plug there, but is that you really hit on a lot of the things that I think are so important. And you talk about racing your way to fitness or something like that. And the application, or the way I've been able to use my minimalist training to approach really big events is the big events, man, they're training too. So I may do, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks where my workouts are only 5 or 10 minutes long. So I'm working out, right now, half an hour a week or less. It's all high intensity stuff. But then at the end of those 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going out and I'm running, 50K, or I'm doing a big long swim or a multi-sport thing where I'm, biking over mountains and stuff. So I'm using those, and it's not all races. Sometimes it's trips or adventures or, just big efforts that I kind of look at a map and figure things I want to do. But I'm doing that regularly. And so I don't think that if all you do, you're going to lose something. And a lot of it's mental, because I think that the high intensity stuff is really good at maintaining a level of fitness, because I've already got a pretty good level of fitness doing this over years, for 5 years or 10 years, actually. High intensity training with regular doses of big efforts, right? You can manage a pretty high level of fitness. And of course, I'll be the first person to say that if I wanted to be, let's say, go run a 10K race and be competitive, right? I would have to do more. I look at it like you do with the 80-20 principle, right? I'm happy, and I kind of talk in my book about the second iteration of that, which is the 64-4 principle, 64-4, right? So I can get to 64%, and this is, obviously just kind of a ballpark, but I can get to about 2/3 of my fitness potential on 4% of the training time it would take me to get to 100%. Meaning I was training like a professional athlete with the coach, no other job, perfect nutrition, all that kind of stuff. Like my fitness potential, I can get to about 2/3 of that, training an hour a week or less. And that's really not bad, especially if I'm willing to devote some more time. I can get, to 80%, which honestly, if you think about the recreational runner and the weekend warrior, which is 99.5% of the people who are involved in the fitness industry, right? They're at probably somewhere in there between 2/3 and 80% of their potential, because it's hard to be devoted in the way, consistently, to put your body through those demands and have the power over your mind to consistently do those high quality workouts that professional athletes do. It's hard. So, 2/3 of your fitness potential is pretty darn good. You can do an awful lot if you think about that's actually, your potential as a human being, not given your current life circumstances. This is your potential, your physical potential and mental potential as a person to be an athlete. So in that sense, man, maintaining that with high intensity work is pretty good.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you mentioned before we started recording that you've got a family, you've got I think you said 1 or 2 kids, and so this approach to training is, for me, just a way to sort of enjoy life more, but still participate in the sport that I love. What is it about, these ultra events that keeps drawing you back? I mean, you mentioned that you could start racing 10K. Why not just drop down to a 10K? Is there something special about the ultra events that you enjoy?
Absolutely. I'll occasionally run a 10K race as a testing thing to see how my fitness is and whatever. But for me, what I love, and what I'm going to continue doing is doing the races that the question is not, hey, can you finish in the time you want to finish in? But the question is, can you finish? Right? So So if I'm going to pay money for a race, and this is just my personal preference, usually I'm going to pay money for a race where that's the question. At least on some level, I get to ask, am I going to be able to dig deep enough? Am I going to be able to overcome those mental demons, and have those conversations with my central governor, enter that debate, and come out basically the master of my physical body? And those are the questions that I'm fascinated with, And so in that sense, I've probably got a little bit different interest than you, because because I can do that on my fitness level. Mm-hmm. And I still want to do well, right? I don't want to just, because I could sit on the couch all day and eat potato chips and get out of shape and then still enter a race and ask that question. But my question, so for me, it's more, can I do this well? And I've my experience has been pretty positive. I have had one or two DNFs, but largely, I'm able to keep going. And so that again that's why Ultra is just, I think about it as digging holes. I get to dig this big, massive hole, psychological and physical hole, and I get to sit down there in that hole and see, see what it looks like, see where I go, the deep, dark places I go, and then pull myself out of. Makes everything else seem great, right?
Yeah.
After you do a big race, and yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's something, I feel like I get that even with a marathon. It might not be an ultra, but there's times where, I ran my first marathon and it just really humbled me. And there's just something almost spiritual about it you really do have to dig deep as the events get longer. I admit that say even running a fast 5K or 10K can be really difficult, but there's something special I feel like that comes with when you start to go longer. I feel like even like the runner's high has even gotten greater, but just something about it, being out there and just running, seeing if you can complete the distance is pretty cool.
Well, and it's because a lot of training is at the shorter distances, right? So like when you're running, 1 miles flat out with 30-second rest, you're getting the same challenge that you get when you run a 5K, essentially, right? Oh. It's a physiological challenge. It's how much can I get out of this machine? But you're absolutely right. You don't really start having those conversations with the central governor until you get to longer distances, right? Mm-hmm. Because now it's this whole give and take game, and your mind's telling you can't keep going, and you start to feel that fatigue and all of those things. So I always look at it. It's basically between that 2 and 3 hour mark, right? When you're pushing hard and you're pushing beyond that point, that's the point where you're no longer operating on, you burn through your muscle glycogen, so now you're starting to call up other fuel sources. And so there's all this physiological stuff as well as the mental stuff that really starts adding up when you get to races that long that are, that is so fun, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. So, your book, the subtitle says, on a few hours a week or less. Let's say you had, you were at a good place in your life. You had a consistent schedule. What would you recommend for someone, say, listening to this, who's running maybe half marathon, or 50K, and they've basically taken the traditional approach. Maybe they're doing 30 to 40 miles a week, and they've kind of plateaued, and they're looking for something different. What would you say to that type of person? How could they change their training to sort of follow in line with your book that could really help them see improvements?
Well,
or maybe not even see improvements. Maybe that's the wrong question, but maybe see, because they could see improvements, but maybe train in a different way to get more from less, I guess.
Right. I think that one of the things is a focus on higher intensity work. I mean, you talk about how the only way you're going to get faster is to run faster, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't. If you can run for hours at a 10-minute mile pace, you're going to struggle to run 1 mile at a 6-minute mile pace, right? So mm-hmm. You train to get faster. And so I always think about it in terms of figure out, mentally, and I often think that it's a mental limit. Figure out mentally how much high intensity work you can maintain or sustain, on a consistent basis. And I think a lot of what you do is also high intensity work. Tempo runs, a 3 mile flat out race pace run, I consider that high intensity work. Mm-hmm. that's kind of the upper limit of high intensity work. But figure out how much of that you can do on a weekly basis, and then make that your focus. So cut everything else out. So forget the long runs, because honestly, if you've been training traditionally, you've been doing long runs, right? And so, in terms of the Pareto principle, I think that if 80% of your fitness comes from 20%, then you cut out everything but the 20%, and then you only add back in, once you get all of that 20%. So the long runs are not part of that 20%. You're not getting a lot of fitness from those long runs. Maybe you're getting mental confidence and things like that. But the other thing that I talk about a lot is the mental side of things, right? And there's an interesting catch-22 sometimes, I think, that traditional folks, or folks that train traditionally, especially people that are coming into marathon running for the first time, they look at this program online and they'll say, all right, if I can follow this program, then it's going to prepare me for the marathon. And in some sense it does, right? Obviously there's these physiological adaptations, you're getting durability of tissue and all that kind of stuff. But mentally, to run a good marathon, you're going to suffer. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. You're going to suffer.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of first timers, you follow a program, and it even extends itself even more to bigger races, because the marathon you can almost train for. If you're looking at a 100-mile run, or a 50-mile run, then you can't adequately run long runs enough to make that feel easy. And it's not good, right? Your body will break down. You can't train, using super compensation so that 50 miles is easy, right? You just can't do it.
Right.
And so by following a program that is supposed to prepare you for this, when you get in the event, and then you hit that first low where you feel, horrible, and you're not really prepared to deal with that. And a lot of people, I've seen loads of, just especially in adventure racing, which is even longer stuff. You get these triathletes that are just top triathletes at the half Ironman distance and stuff, and they're getting in these situations where they're broken and they're not used to that, and they don't know how to overcome that. And so there's a benefit to training for a race and getting fast, and focusing on speed, and you get through the first 15 miles way faster than you thought you were going to, because you've trained really fast runs, up to 10 miles or whatever. And now you're thinking, holy crap, I'm doing really well. And now all I've got to get through is this next 11 miles. But you don't have this false sense of confidence, right? It's going to hurt. You're like, well, I've only ever run 10 miles. Now this is going to hurt. Mm-hmm. And so you're kind of going into it mentally with a little bit different of mindset, and once you get that first marathon, for me, it's this progression, right? If you want to use high intensity, low volume stuff to move towards bigger events, you just do the bigger events. Mm-hmm. You start with a half marathon, then you do a marathon, and then okay, I'm tough enough to get through this. And you don't worry so much initially as you're building up in the duration of these events. You don't worry so much about how fast you're doing them, right? You think, all right, my goal is to take the speed I've developed and the fitness I've developed, and then I'm going to do as much with it as I can, and then when I get to the end, I know that there's going to be this point where I'm suffering and I'm hitting the wall, and I'm just going to keep going. And you build that confidence that way. I mean, for me, it's all about not having an expectation that you can train for these things. And the focus is on training is always physical. You get online and you get a program for a 50-mile run. It's telling you how far to run, and that's it, right? How many days a week, how far, what your mileage is, and all that kind of stuff. And the fact of the matter is that on a 50-mile run, or even on a marathon, there's like the famous quote, not running is 10% physical, the rest is mental, or something like that. And that's in focusing on a training program, all we're focusing on is the physical. And that matters so much less than all this other stuff. And yet we put all our efforts and time and energy into feeling like we're preparing ourselves physically, and then we never really do. The bigger runs, you always are going to be breaking down your body. You're always going to be having to face that thing where you're telling your body, I know that the tissues are broken down. I know you have no more energy. I know that you want to stop, but I'm not going to let you. Your knees hurt, your ankles hurt. You feel like you've got IT band issues, whatever's going on. All those self-limiting things, and pushing through that is something that It's very hard to approach in training, and you also shouldn't approach it in training. You got injured a lot when you were training high volume, right?
Right.
Trying
Yeah.
to train for a long run by running long is only exacerbating the damages that invariably come from a repetitive type motion over a long term, right? I mean, I
Right.
don't
Right.
think I ever run a hard marathon without feeling, flare-ups in my Achilles and having my knees sore, my ankles, and so that sort of tissue damage is normal, right?
Hmm.
And if you try to replicate that in training, doing 60 miles, 80-mile weeks, man, you're you're not actually serving the purpose of being healthy, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I always think you got to show up at the start line healthy. And in order to do that, make sure that you're training. Make sure that you never get injured in training. And you have a really good approach. It's more of a, listen to your body approach, but it's crucial, right? If you should not be training through injury, and so many people do, right? So never train through injury,
Yep.
and listen to your body, and don't worry about the numbers, right? So in my approach, I found real success using really short high intensity stuff because I found that I'm hardly ever injured, especially from my training.
Hmm.
Occasionally I will come back from a 50-mile run on low training, and I will take 2 weeks off because my knees will be swollen. I'll have all these issues that are self-limiting. But it's good to do that, right? I mean, you really should be doing that anyway. Um, so my advice, I guess, getting back to the question, is just to reassess. And I would recommend people read your book as well, especially if they're specifically focused on running. It's great, and there's a lot of similarities between what you say and what I say. And you know, and again, the just high intensity stuff. It's not for everybody, and I think that the reason why more people don't do high intensity stuff is because it's hard, right? It
That's right.
hurts. I mean, it really does. But I think that if you can develop a penchant for that, and it doesn't even have to be max effort, right? A lot of people talk about tempo runs and finding paces so that it's a little more digestible mentally than just going flat out.
Hmm.
But approaching a higher intensity, approaching something that feels uncomfortable and spending as much time feeling uncomfortable as you can is going to give you fitness gains, across the board, whether it's in running or biking or swimming or whatever it is. The more time you can spend, the more minutes of your workout are done at higher intensity, the fewer, minutes total you have to work out to achieve the same level of fitness. And that's pretty hard to dispute. So, so
Right. Right. I think that what you said there is that it is really tough to do high intensity workouts, and that's one of the reasons that I've had to limit myself to do only one or two per week, because sometimes I'll think, man, I'm ready for another one, but no, if you try to do 3 or 4 of these a week, I found that it just ends up, my performance actually after a few weeks goes down. Whereas if I approach each workout with fresh legs, I stay injury free and I gradually improve little by little. And like I noticed that sometimes, say if I'm haven't been running a lot and I start getting back into the high intensity stuff, like I was injured this winter with a water from water skiing, and as I was getting back into it, my tempo or time trials would get faster by like 30 seconds from week to week, and I don't think that was my physiology. That was just my brain telling me, giving myself confidence that I was doing it. So I think that part where you mentioned that a lot of this is mental is really right on.
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it's your brain letting you get closer to that edge. Because when you're at your actual physical edge, you don't improve 30 seconds a week. You're basically, you might improve 2 seconds one week and then you're back to where you were. And like
Hmm.
when you're really at the point where you're not getting much faster. And there are actual limits, right? I mean, our physiology and our biology and genetics do create some sort of a limit. That's obvious. It's not, humans. It's not like we can go out and run a 2-minute mile.
Right.
Physiologically, our muscles cannot move our joints fast enough to cover that distance. Right? So, there are actual limits, but I think that the biggest um, the limiter is for many people is mental. I mean, you will absolutely improve fitness and develop more muscle fibers and a better ability to utilize muscle fibers. But again, that has ties to the brain as well, right? It is how many muscle fibers your brain lets you use, like you talk about with the fatigue, so yeah.
Exactly. Well, Andy, we've been talking for about 30 minutes, and do you have any more time? I'd
Yep.
like to get into a few more questions if you have time.
Yep.
Okay, I'm interested in, we have people who are bloggers and authors and other people who listen to this show, and I'm interested in just your approach to writing and how you went about writing this book. What was your process like for getting it on Amazon, and how did that go for you?
Well, the writing was the easy part. I had actually been blogging for a little while, on a blog 3 hours a week. And I kind of I'd been thinking about this, and crafting articles, and I'd written a few articles for various spots, or various online magazines. And so a lot of it was just kind of putting all my thoughts into an outline and structuring it in a way that I thought made sense. And the writing was fun. I mean, it's sitting down, and for the most part, it was fun. Towards the end, it always gets a little bit harder because you're trying to polish everything and bring it together. It was definitely a challenge. I mean, as a firm, I've done anything like this, and getting it into a format that's good for Amazon, for example, was difficult because I had not done the research to figure out how to start correctly. So I was writing it in a format that was then hard to convert. So I did hire somebody to kind of put it into the right form, to convert it to, the Kindle would use and all that kind of stuff. So, that really wasn't something I did. The most challenging part, of course, is, that I struggle a lot with is getting the ideas out there, right? It's the promotion. And because I'm not really too focused on self-promotion. I've got a lot of other stuff going on where I want to put my energies. But there is definitely that thing where you've written this book, you think it has value to people. You're not interested in pushing it, but you figure the more people know about it, the more people it can inspire, or that they're going to make use of some of the information you have that's unique, or the approach that you have. So that's where I've, over the last year, because I think my book was released last July, I've struggled with that, alternately thinking, oh man, I really got focused on getting on social media and trying to do this, but I'm not good at it. Right. So, it's been a hard thing for me, but I've gotten good feedback from the people who have read the book. And I've gotten, a couple people that have put it on their site, Gear Junkie in Minneapolis, which is not too far from you, right?
Yep.
I know the editor of that, and he gave me a good review in there, and so that got a lot of people talking about it and just sharing it. Like I say, I've got a brother, twin brother that's on a professional adventure racing team. He's kind of shared it with his circles and done some stuff with it himself for his training. But the writing again was easy. It's the promotion, right? It takes a lot of time, and it's definitely a unique skill set with all the different avenues. You can read as many articles as you want about how to promote your ebook, but it's a lot of luck, I think.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges I found with writing my book was not so much the writing, but organizing my thoughts. And I eventually found a program that allowed me to sort of outline as I was writing. It's called Multi-Markdown Composer. Did you write in any program that allowed you to organize your thoughts or anything like that? Did you use Microsoft Word or Google Docs or what?
I mean, I've used Google Drive, I think, is initially how I was using it, because I was sharing it with the guy that encouraged me, who's doing some editing. But no, that was the challenging part for me. Is I'd have these pieces that I'd written that I thought were good, from my blog, and I'd think, where is this going to fit? And so I did a lot of cutting and pasting, and the outlining was pretty easy. Initially, I decided, all right, I'm going to start with about me, and then physical, mental. And so once I got that outlined, but then what to include in those sections, how much to put in there, I would have liked to have some assistance like that, because certainly organizing it was tough, and because it's a labor of love, right? there's a lot of stuff that I thought, oh man, this is a good piece I've written. I want to include this, but then some stuff didn't fit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's anecdotal stuff or other stuff that just didn't fit, and making those decisions is sometimes challenging. Um, and then figuring out what is too much information, it's challenging, but it's a first book, and so I tried to give myself a little bit of a leeway in terms of not being too hard on myself and saying, it's a good effort. And I figured that if you don't start somewhere, if you're not willing to learn from the process, it's not going to be perfect the first time. So for me, it really was about learning from the process. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to give myself a deadline. That helped me a lot. I said, all right, I missed the deadline, by the way. I didn't, the deadline was May and it didn't happen until July, but still it was important to, have a deadline. So this is, we're going to have it done by, to encourage me to get the work done. But yeah, it was a good process, but definitely a lot of work. So
Yeah. Well, Andy, I sure appreciate you coming on the call and sharing everything about your book and the differences and the similarities between our two approaches. And it's just been great talking with you. So thanks so much for coming on the call.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. I've got lots of questions for you at some point. So, yeah. And again, I thought it was good. Sometimes I just like to reach out to people because honestly, there's not a lot of people out there, at least in my experience. It's more now since there's a lot more science behind high intensity training, but it's not a lot of people who are doing and succeeding at using real minimalist approaches, because there's so much literature, and most of the programs are just really advocating the opposite. That it was really cool, first of all, to find out that you'd published that book, and then also to note how many of my own thoughts and motivation was real similar to yours. So I'm really glad we connected.
Yeah. And where's the best place that people can go to find out about more about you?
Ultramental book.
Okay.
Website. So just
Ultramentalbook.com.
ultramentalbook at Gmail. Yeah, ultramentalbook.com. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah. And so that's got you can contact me through that and find out about the book. And there's a link to my blog on there. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right.